So guys, welcome to the channel. So today we're checking out this interesting article and video where the Volvo CEO is mentioning that the car industry in the West needs to shape up in order to compete with the Chinese EVs. So we're going to find out if he's going to provide us with a strategy on how the Western world will be able to actually combat all of this or be able to compete with the Chinese EVs, because at the moment it looks quite discouraging. But you know what? Let's not waste time. Let's get into it.
You can talk now naturally with your car. They are losing market share to the Chinese. If we can save life and make cars safer, we are very open to share that.
Welcome to The Big Question, the Euronews series where we sit down with some of the biggest names in business. I'm Eleanor Butler, and today I'm joined by Håkan Samuelsson, CEO of Volvo Cars. So let's start off with a broad look at the auto sector here in Europe. What are the key trends, but also the major challenges?
I think three new things, three challenges. One is the position we have on the Chinese market is getting much tougher. New Chinese competitors, especially then new electric cars coming in on the market. That's something new for the European brands in China. They are losing market share to the Chinese, especially in the electric ones. And the other is, of course, all of the...
It's not only in the electric ones. A lot of Western companies are losing great market share in just the automotive industry in general, especially in China and also internationally. Because right now, I think in a lot of Western countries, they have heavy tariffs on Chinese cars, but other countries don't have that. Other countries are taking in Chinese cars en masse. If you go to places like Brazil and South Africa, there is a lot of orders coming in from China.
Talks now about tariffs that change how we can export cars to the US. We have been big exporters of cars from Europe to both China and to US. That has changed, and we need to adapt to a new situation. On top of that, the third one is, of course, electrification. We need to electrify because of the climate challenge, but I think also electric cars are a better solution for customers.
This is also quite a quagmire that I think Western countries kind of put themselves in, where there was a big shift towards electrical vehicles, but then the problem is the West hadn't pretty much solidified the infrastructure to be able to facilitate the manufacture and also the processing and refinement of a lot of the rare earth metals that are needed for the manufacture of electrical vehicles. So one thing I don't think the West kind of banked on was that the Chinese are going to become this dominant when it comes to making cars. I don't think they actually sat down and actually thought, oh yeah, the Chinese could actually pretty much try to make their own stuff, and they could actually do it way better and way cheaper, considering they actually even have the materials ready to be able to do that.
Back in 2021, Volvo announced that it would be all electric by the end of the decade. Now you've scaled that down, aiming for 90% electric, and
all of them are scaling down a lot of these ambitions, and it's all due to, well, they want to say tariffs, but the truth is materials. They're not getting enough materials to be able to actually manufacture most of the stuff they want to manufacture. Secondly, most of the European car manufacturers are basically being forced to partner up with Chinese manufacturers to be able to make something. And the Chinese manufacturers also have to make their stuff as well. So, and they will prioritize their own manufacturing before they actually prioritize the European manufacturers. So it's going to be more expensive to manufacture a European electric vehicle compared to a Chinese vehicle. Well, this is where the competitive advantage starts tilting towards the Chinese side.
plug-in hybrid mix by 2030. Can you tell me about that decision?
Our future as a company, I think, still is as an all-electric company. And what we see now, maybe we were a bit over-optimistic that this could be reached already 2030. I mean, in some...
That's true. They were over-optimistic, very optimistic. And it's usually a case of, I would say it's a corporate solipsism, where they basically only looked at the situation as they influence it. They never factored in other players other than the usual ones who've been there or the legacy automakers. But they actually understood the difficulties that those other automakers had. But they never really factored in Chinese manufacturers. They never even considered them. There was information about it, but it wasn't a case where there was that much data to actually deal with. in my assumption. And this kind of led to where we are right now.
Some regions, the charging infrastructure is not there. So I think we need to rely on the possibilities to drive on a combustion engine when you lack charging possibilities. So I think to have a credible end date for combustion cars need to be combined with a very credible date also for investments and expansion of the charging networks. Otherwise, of course, it will not be possible to be all electric 2035.
That one is going to be impossible considering a good example in places like Germany. The new incoming regime, that's the Friedrich Merz regime, promised energy cuts. And they just backed out of that promise just a few weeks ago, which is actually very interesting considering you're saying, hey, we need to go electric as far as the automotive industry is concerned, but not really making it enticing for the end consumer as the government. And on top of that, a lot of companies or small companies are having to deal with a lot of like taxes on carbon dioxide and green initiative kind of situations. And they have to pay like charges, like surcharges. And even like for things like logistics and stuff, you have to pay a CO2 surcharge, which adds on to the cost. But you're not getting any kind of benefit in general. And you're being told, hey, if you use EVs, there's a subsidy for it. But even that subsidy doesn't really equate to how much energy you're going to have to use.
Another of Volvo's major aims is safety. So actually, I believe that it was one of your engineers who invented the three-point seatbelt back in the 1950s. Can you tell us how you're prioritizing safety at the moment?
Safety always is a part of it's very difficult then to, of course, to export cars out of Europe, at least with the profitability, because cost increase, of course, when you bring them in. So we need to ways react. One is to hope that the European Union could strike a deal with the US about a reasonable tariff system for the car sector. I don't think it's over-optimistic either to believe that there is a possibility for such a deal. But independently of that, I believe also we need to produce more locally. So we are strengthening.
What's happened is Trump has pretty much, or this whole the tariffs coming from the States is bringing up a situation where a lot of these companies, how can I put this? Like you're being bogged down by just unnecessary things in a time whereby you're supposed to be figuring out how to be able to actually compete with the Chinese automotive industry. Because as the West is still consumed again by its own corporate solipsism, what's happening is China is really expanding its markets. Considering most of the cars that are actually coming from China and there is luxury cars and there's also cheaper cars. So that means the whole world around, the market is open for them. And as the West or the Western world is basically bickering with one another on how much are you paying, how much are we paying and stuff like that, which also China is involved for sure. But there's a part where on a macro scale or on a bigger scale, China is still able to sell its cars to other countries. And funny enough, other countries matter. There's a huge market out there. But sometimes the communication or the rhetoric that you get is there's this whole focus on it's either the Chinese market or it's the Western market kind of situation. There's a whole large ass market out there. The Chinese are going for it mercilessly, and this is something which a lot of the Western legacy auto industries don't factor in. That other market out there can change your whole internal market or this whole Western market that you're bickering here. And it starts with small little things like, I'd say, people travel. You travel to a different country, you go to Brazil or you go to South Africa or you go to Asia and you get picked up by a taxi, which is a Chinese vehicle, or you rent a car, which you probably find at a cheaper cost, and it's a Chinese vehicle, and you use it for the time being that you're there, and you get to experience it. The same way, a good example is I had a friend who got exposed to Uber. So I had a friend from Germany who went to LA and got exposed to Uber. At that time, Uber was not in Germany or in Europe. Most of Europe was basically the usual normal taxis where you end up finding out how much you're going to pay after the ride is over or at your destination. Once he got to see that, he was sold. He was actually saying, I would like that app here. So eventually the app ended up in Germany, and it's been causing a stir ever since. There's always been protests ever since. But at the end of the day, the idea is there. It's come. It's here, you can't do anything about it. You just have to adapt to it. It's the same thing even with Waymo. Waymo is going to come and absolutely destroy a lot of legacy taxi industries in Europe, which are still relying on drivers, which are still relying on meters, where you will not know how much you're going to pay if at the end of your destination, regardless of whether there's traffic or not. So same thing here. People will find out about the Chinese cars, and funny enough, they might actually not end up finding out about Chinese cars within their country or within the country. They could actually end up finding out elsewhere. There's so many people that travel all around the world, millions, and once they basically get exposed to this, it's game over.
For America's region, not just to sell imported cars, but also to build more cars in the US. And we are very happy to have a factory in Charleston, South Carolina, and we're now looking into utilizing that more, adding a car line to our lineup there. So we need now to find a bit sort of bread and butter model that can sell in high volumes, which we can deliver faster to our customers and of course reduce stock and transportation costs. So local production is not only a cost increase, it has advantages also. So even if the tariffs would come down to a more reasonable level, we still need to use our factory more than we do today.
This whole tariff situation, yeah, like Trump wants jobs in America for sure. But on the other hand, it's forcing a lot of legacy automakers to make massive investments in the States. Good for the States, bad for the car industry. Because as you're making those massive investments in trying to fulfill this whole tariff situation, on the other hand, as I've said, you're losing your market share by the hour, if not by the second, internationally. Because you know what, I will actually approach this towards the end of this video.
And Chinese EV firms are competing for customers in Europe, but are you worried that a glut of Chinese cars could potentially make their way to Europe if they are diverted away from the US because of tariffs?
We will have very tough competition from new Chinese EV players. And then the sooner we get used to that and the sooner we start developing our cars, the better. There is really no protection in form from tariffs or other ways. The only protection for our industry is that we shape up and we will need to be more competitive.
And in China, you're facing fierce competition.
The problem also is, it sounds good on paper in terms of the competitiveness that the Volvo CEO is actually talking about. The problem is the Chinese automaker is not dealing with the same kind of regulations and labor laws as the European automakers, even in China. So this is going to be very, very complicated and very, very interesting situation. Because you see, Europe, number one, has very strict patent laws, and on top of that has a lot of bureaucracy. So allowing Chinese automakers into Europe, they can be able to understand everything and how they work in the market, to be able to actually get enough data and compete with the Chinese automakers. Now, the problem is they can't do anything about it. It's not like they can actually hi, we like this, we're going to copy this. Considering once the Chinese automakers are here, it works for them that you guys are so highly regulated that you can't copy anything that actually we have that you don't have. But when you go to China, they can do exactly that. What you have and we don't have, we can absolutely copy. No shame. And when those parts or the finished car comes to Europe, you can't do anything about it because the car basically was not manufactured here completely, probably partly. So that means, in simple words, they will have to add more regulation. And this is something which the EU is actually very good at. And in part, as they add those regulations, guess what? They also impede their own industries. In simple words, this is basically a snake eating its own tail. Very interesting situation.
Competition from firms like BYD that offer low-cost models. Can you effectively challenge these firms for market share in China?
Yeah, for sure we will try to do that, and so we need to be better there. And I think to be better, we need also to make the business in China a bit more regional. We need to listen more to the local people in the region and adapt a bit to local habits and local taste, and also have some cars that are special maybe for the Chinese market.
And looking ahead, how do you see the future of personal transport?
Electric cars with advanced pilots is both from convenience and environment a good solution for long-range travel, a very personal way of traveling. But of course it does not solve the problem with congestions on the roads. So I think we also, of course, need other concept. I think high-speed trains, for example, is a very convenient way of traveling long distances in Europe that has to be developed.
I think what will have to take place is, like, let's say, absolute failure. Absolute failure. Like some legacy Western companies have to absolutely disappear, like fail, so that there is good data of how things are going to go down for everyone else, if you're not careful. Because at the moment there's a lot of corporate solipsism. It's non-ending. Like, there's the part whereby, okay, we're talking about the Chinese market and the Western market. Cool. Again, I've said there's the other markets. And this is something the Chinese have known ever since, or take advantage of, that the Western world doesn't. And right now you have a lot of Chinese projects all around the world. E.g., the Chinese made or constructed a lot of ports in the third world countries. And these ports are basically subsidized by the Chinese government. That means a lot of the imports or exports from China, coming from China into these regions, are not levied the same duty or the same taxes as exports from other countries. So that means even the cars and items from China, which compete directly with Western manufacturers in these markets, will not be at the same price, and it's going to be very, very difficult to compete. The other thing is the speed at how the Chinese are able to make their cars, and some of it is attributed to vertical integration. Some of it is also attributed to reduced development cycles, which almost one and the same in a way, but a little bit different. A good example is Chinese automakers basically have managed to slash the vehicle development time by more than half, often completing an all-new or redesigned model in as little as 18 months. Whereas traditional manufacturers, e.g., well, when you say traditional manufacturers, that means the Western manufacturers, typically take several years. For example, Chery, that's the Chinese manufacturer, rapidly managed to overhaul a whole suspension and steering of its Omoda 5 SUV for the European market in just a matter of 6 weeks. A task that Riccardo Tonelli, so Chery's senior vehicle dynamics expert. Another thing also you need to notice is a lot of Europeans also working in a lot of these Chinese companies. They poached a lot of people, or they're poaching a lot of talent from Europe, and they're giving them benefits and salaries that the European market cannot compete with. So apparently Riccardo Tonelli, that's Chery, as I've said, the Chery senior vehicle development dynamics expert, estimated it would take Western manufacturers well over a year to do the same kind of iterations. This is because of having to deal with a lot of bureaucratic organizations. Oh, you need to send these parts here for them to be inspected. They have to be approved by this organization. There's so many organizations that actually come in, and on top of that, drive the cost of that particular iteration up. And in general, it's said that the average age of a Chinese brand electric or plug-in hybrid model sold domestically is 1.5 years for foreign brand. That means in terms of development cycle, that it takes foreign brands around 5.5 years for them to basically develop and come into a new car, compared to the Chinese manufacturers who take 1.5 years. And this whole shaving off years development cycle saves a ton of cost. And this ensures that the Chinese players are able to offer affordable vehicles and have the newest models at any given time. And again, remember the part where the Chinese government was developing a lot of ports around the world for so many different markets, including Brazil, South Africa, Kenya, Sri Lanka, and all these other areas. You tack on all of these advantages that I've just mentioned right now, and you tack on that part, I don't know. This is going to be a very, very interesting situation. It's just going to be very difficult for the Western auto industry to compete. And the worst part is the Western auto industry is they can't say that, okay, we're gonna try pivot ourselves into the luxury market. The Chinese are all there as well. They're able to make cars which actually are, I don't know, you can talk to as a CEO saying, you can speak to your car. There's so many technologies in these Chinese cars, and they're being sold for very cheap prices. The other thing that I find that really takes the cake, and it's taking the Western manufacturers' lunch money, is the good enough and fail fast philosophy. That means let's not overthink about this. Let's not sit here and overcomplicate things. And this is basically a mirror of how the Silicon Valley startups work. Like, it's intensive real world testing. Like, make it, get it out there. Let's see how it behaves, and let's have more simulations. Let's see how it functions in the real world as fast as we can, instead of sitting and overthinking, over-engineering a product. Good enough and fail fast, I don't think can actually work in Europe, because bureaucracy makes you start thinking of so many other factors which do not come into play as far as getting a product out there. At the end of the day, the customer or the public or the marketplace just wants to know it's there or it's not. And when you have a situation whereby, even if, let's say, you end up having a good quality item, at the end of the day, if you have someone else who's able to bring stuff to the market, it might not be the best quality to begin with, but again, they're able to actually take a lot of very fast, which in general, it's not that I'm advocating for it. I know, considering I'm basically a consumer, I end up suffering because I know for a fact that I'm just going to get a low quality item really fast. But at the end of the day, how do you compete with someone who's able to manufacture cars so fast? And on top of him basically being able to manufacture cars so fast, yes, he's going to start with low quality items, but eventually he'll reach your point in 5 years. And on top of that, he already has a market tapped in by the time you finish your product. It's going to be very, very interesting in the next coming few years. I'll be following up on this topic and giving you updates. So thank you for being here, and see you on the next video.